What was the last thing that we covered previously?
It was SSR and TLS.
SSL and TLS. Okay. So any questions that you might have from those topics? No?
No, sir.
Okay. So we have talked about hashing, correct? We have covered hashing
Yes, sir.
and
Yes,
we've
sir.
seen tools as well. Have we talked about salting?
No, sir.
No? Okay, let's talk about salting then. So we know that when we store passwords, we store them as hashes. Okay, we don't directly store passwords in a database. We first convert them into hashing. Now there is another concept involved here known as salting. So let's take a look at what that is. So adding salt to hashing or salting. Now see if uh, okay, first let's consider just normal password hashing. Now in this table there are 6 users and these are their password hashes. Now 2 users have the same password, Alice and Bob. So you can see the hash is the same. That means they have the same password. Okay, so this is the exact same hash for both of them. Now, if someone, again, not someone, just an attacker does have access to this database, if an attacker is able to extract the passwords from this database, then they will be able to see that, okay, these 2 people have the same password. So if an attacker is able to crack one of these, he automatically has the other one as well. And in this example, we have taken a very small database, very small set of users for demonstration purposes. But in an actual database, there would be thousands of users. There could be thousands of users. And it does indeed happen that a lot of people have the same password since people keep weak passwords. They don't focus on password strength. So if a lot of people have the same weak password, then coincidentally, not coincidentally, I mean, then consequently, their hashes are also going to be the same because if the same algorithm is used for everyone for a same input, no matter how many times you calculate the hash, the output will always be the same. So now, like I mentioned, this is somewhat of a security issue. So to prevent such a situation, we use a concept known as salting. Now what salting is that okay, first let's talk about uh, a little bit again about unsalted hashes. So like I mentioned, if the attacker has access to one password, in this case, if he's able to crack one, then he'll be able to crack others having the same hash. So attacker can use a rainbow table, which is a pre-computed database of hashes, and he can use this to crack these hashes. Now, the thing is, when we are adding salt to passwords, basically what salt is, it's a fixed length cryptographically strong random value that is added to the input of hash functions to create unique hashes for all inputs, even if the input is not unique. So when you add a random value to your password before calculating the hash, even if two people have the same password, since those values, those random values will be different, so for both people, the hashes will also be different values, even though they are using the exact same password. So let's see uh, a better example of what is being talked about here. So let's say we have this password farm1990m00, and the salt is this. You can solve that password by either appending or prepending. So we can add it either before the password or after the password. So in this case, you've added it after the password, and in this case, the salt is added before the password. Now, as we know, these two values are different from each other, so the hashes they generate will also be different. Okay, the same thing. Now see, what they have shown is that for the second user, the salt is different. Okay, so the same password but different salts for both users. So the hash also will be different. So even though these passwords match for these users, the stored hashes will be different. So different users, same password, different salts, different hashes. So if someone looked at the database, the entire list of hashes, no one will know that these two users are both using the same password. Each unique salt extends the password and transforms it into a unique password. Now, in practice, we would store the salt in clear text along with the hash in our database. So, in the database, we would be storing the salt, the hash, and the username. So, what happens is when you log in, the when a user logs in, the first thing that will be checked is the username. Then, whatever value is entered for the password, that will be taken. The salt that is present in the database, that salt will be added, and after that salt is added to the provided password value, the hash is calculated and compared with the value stored in the database. So once that is done, depending on whether those hashes match or not, the website will tell you whether you have logged in, whether you have entered the correct password or not. So they've given another example: two users having same password, different salts, but hashes are different. So while the attacker might be able to crack one password, cracking all passwords would be unfeasible. Now see, in this, using this salting, it's not that the attacker will not be able to uh, perform any kind of password cracking. It's not that we're completely stopping the password cracking, but we are slowing it down. We are making it much slower. And that basically is going to discourage the attacker. Because see, what happens is he cannot use a default rainbow table, since Rainbow tables don't take into account salts. So that is one thing. You cannot use most default rainbow tables. He'd have to calculate it differently for every value, unless of course he has a really large rainbow table in which he has pre-calculated, you know, billions of different possible combinations. But again, that is something that is extremely unfeasible and not very practical in most situations. And after, doing all this, we are basically able to slow down attackers by huge extent, slow down the attack and discourage them from attacking. Generating a good random salt. So there are some OWASP guidelines you can follow. Now, a system-wide salt is pointless because obviously that is not going to fulfill your purpose. If you have the same salt for all values, then even for the same passwords, you will have again always your same passwords, or sorry, for the same hashes for the same password. If you're using the salt, uh, you're using the same salt across the system, so that's not useful. That's just a waste of space. So hashes should be unique. Even, and you don't even create one salt for per user. For example, if the user creates a password once, make a unique salt for that. If the user changes their password, so again change your salt as well. Use random data. Okay, so as storage permits, use 32 byte or 64 byte salt, depending on what kind of storage you have. And let alone salting, the issue is that a lot of places, a lot of websites, a lot of companies don't even perform hashing on passwords. Okay, let alone adding salts. They simply store passwords in the database in plain text. So they're storing the password as it is without make you know making any kind of effort to secure it. So this is not good from a security perspective, because again, if in case of an attack, what's going to happen? If someone is accessing the database, they directly have the passwords. So that is a very serious issue as well. Even until recently, a lot of big websites were storing passwords in clear text, let alone smaller businesses or smaller companies. A lot of major websites were doing this thing. So you can imagine what uh, you know how easy that makes it for attackers who have found a way to get into these people's systems. They get the data from the database, and of course all the passwords are easily found in. So that is what salting is about. Okay, and one more thing, hashing salts are like speed bumps in an attacker's road to data breaching. It does not matter if your salt is visible or not. What matters it is that you have used a salt. So it will not completely stop attackers, but it will slow them down by a huge extent. Any questions from sorting?
No, sir.
So let's, okay, actually I'll just continue in this window itself. We've studied asymmetric encryption, but okay, have I told you about different algorithms other than RSA? That is, I don't think I have. I'll just go through these ones. So apart from RSA, there are also other algorithms for asymmetric encryption. One is Diffie-Hellman key agreement algorithm. Now this is used not for encryption or for decryption, but for two parties in any sort of communication. This algorithm they can use to generate a symmetric key so that data can be encrypted. So this algorithm is used for agreeing upon a symmetric key or generating a symmetric key for communication between two parties. And this Diffie-Hellman is also one of the algorithms that is used by TLS. Then you have RSA, Ravish Shamir Adelman. We have covered this. Elliptic curve cryptography. Okay, this one ECC. So ECC provides similar functionality to RSA. Okay, this is used to encrypt data, but it can be, it has a benefit that can be implemented in smaller devices like cell phones. Actually your cell phones these days can, modern cell phones can handle RSA as well, but a lot of devices, a lot of mobile devices cannot do that. So ECC is much better for a mobile device, not just mobile phones, mobile devices, smaller devices, any device that needs to perform any cryptographic functions but does not have a lot of computing power. So instead of RSA, ECC can be used because it requires less computing power, and that's why it's a better option for these kind of devices. ECC encryption systems are based on the idea of using points on a curve, on an elliptic curve, to define the public and private key pair. So again, the mathematical, know,
It uses elliptical curve equation.
elliptical curve actually, the curve that you create on a that you see on a graph. So it uses that to generate this key pair. If you if you want to get into the complete mathematical details, I think this should be easily available online. But this kind of calculation, actually, this elliptic curve cryptography, the key, figuring out the keys in this case is much less resource intensive than the algorithm that works for RSA. Let me just show you an image. So this is the sort of graph that you can see in this, and actually what's happening is you calculate these values. So again, it's about how elliptical curves are structured over finite fields. This is a sort of graph that you see. I'm not getting into the complete mathematical details of it, but this is the shape of the graph. So again, there's an algorithm that is used to generate these keys. So first you generate this kind of graph, then you perform some calculations, and you then come to the key value. Now, again, there's a proper algorithm for it, just like for RSA. The next kind of algorithm is El-Gamal. So it's an algorithm used for transmitting digital signatures and key exchanges. So key exchanges like in this Diffie-Hellman. And the method is based on calculating logarithms. So it's based on the characteristics of logarithmic numbers and calculations. The digital signature algorithm, the one that's mentioned after this, is based on the El-Gamal algorithm. And this digital signature algorithm was developed by the United States government for digital signatures. It can only be used for signing data and not for encryption. Okay, so these are a few other asymmetric encryption algorithms besides RSA. I mean, yeah, RSA was included in that list, but we've already covered that previously. So anything you'd like to ask here? No? Okay. Now, the next thing I need to cover is encoding and decoding. So let's talk about that. So are you familiar with what encoding implies? If you had to, if anyone had to give a very simple definition of what encoding is. No? Take a guess. A very, very simple definition I'm asking for. Nothing too in depth or anything. Okay. So see, encoding is simply converting data from one form to another. That's simply what encoding is. And I know the definition seems like the same thing that we say for encryption, but encoding and encryption are different things. Do not confuse them at all.
It is basically changing the bases of the number system, like binary to hexadecimal, hexadecimal to decimal, and then octal. So bases change varies.
Yes, what you're saying is right, but all kinds of algorithm, all kind of encoding is not changing the base. No, because encoding is not just for numbers. Encoding is for there's actually character encoding and there is media encoding. So the purpose of encoding, okay, That is only to shift data, to convert data from one format to another in order to make that data usable to another system or another service, or make it usable in a different environment. Okay, so what you're saying, that's okay, that's also correct, but that's not all encoding is. So now the first kind of encoding that they mention is media encoding. So media encoding is when you're changing the format of a file. Let's say you have a .avi file, audio video interchange format. It's a very rich format, so the file size is very large. But if I want to compress it, if I want to make a smaller file, I can perform encoding on it, and I can convert it to MP4, which will be approximately 1/10 the size of the original AVI file. And I've done this a lot of times. I used to try and do this. So it's not really complicated. It's just you have to use some software which is capable of it. And the main purpose of media encoding is to compress files, to reduce the size of files. So if I have a 1 GB file, I can perform encoding. It will take about 100 MB or 150 MB. Usually even, it's closer to 100 MB after being encoded, after being converted from a heavy format into a slightly lossy format. Actually, nowadays most encoding tries to be lossless, to perform the conversion without any discernible loss in quality. But there might be minor things, there might be minor quality losses. They are mostly not visible to the average user, unless you are doing something like, you know editing, or you're doing a lot of sound producing or video editing. These changes won't be very visible to you. So in the example they have given, it says, for example, a wave or .wav format audio file is converted to an MP3, and that MP3 file may be 1/10 the size of the original wave file. Similarly, an MPG compressed video file may only require a fraction of the disk space as the original .dv digital video file. This article is a little bit old, so DV is not something that you'll see anywhere mostly. So this is media compression. Okay, you're compressing images, or you're compressing audio files, video files. That is your media file encoding. The other kind of encoding is character encoding. So encoding data from one format to another kind of text format. So with regards to this, also you have different types of encoding available. So like, if you talk about binary data, then you need to convert data into the binary format. That's also a kind of encoding process, you could say, like, the example that you mentioned. Then uh, okay, they haven't really provided any other kind of examples. Okay, I'll give you the other examples. And it mentions that whenever data is encoded, it can only be read by a program that supports the correct type of encoding. Usually that's the reason for encoding, that the normal format that you are using will not be understood by the other program, so you need to encode data. Now, that if we talk about the types of encoding, one thing is URL encoding. So you encode certain characters in URLs. Sorry, when you are inserting characters when you're typing a URL, certain characters cannot be written directly, so you need to encode them. For example, take a look at this URL itself. You can see that uh, one character is very one set of characters, this percentage 20, this occurs repeatedly in this URL. This percent 20 simply represents a space, and this is there because a URL cannot have any spaces in it. So if you want to include a space, you need to perform URL encoding, and that converts your Unicode characters to a format in which they can be mentioned in a URL. Similarly, your URL cannot have any commas. So this percent 2c, that represents a comma. So that is your URL encoding. Another thing is HTML encoding. Let's take a look at that. I think that's better referred to as HTML entities. So let's say, for example, if you use the less than or greater than signs in our HTML text, the browser might mix them up with tags. So you can use an HTML entity in this case to represent it. And the format of an HTML entity looks something like this: ampersand and the name of the entity, followed by a semicolon. So for example, a less than sign is represented by a hypersign LT, less than, so LT, and a semicolon, or ampersand octathor 60. But I find this format to be better. It's easier to remember, the first format. Similarly, a non-breaking space is a very commonly used HTML entity. So it's a space that will not break into a new line. Two words separated by a non-breaking space will stick together and not separate into different lines. For that, the entity is ampersand NBSP followed by a semicolon. So in all of these examples, a non-breaking space has been used. For example, if I inspect this element, actually they haven't used the non-breaking space anywhere. So they haven't actually used it, but they're giving it as an example. Great. Another use of the non-breaking space is to prevent browsers from truncating spaces in HTML pages. So if you're writing 10 spaces in your text, the browser will remove 9 of them. To add real spaces so that the browser doesn't remove them, you can use the non-breaking space entity. Some other entities are mentioned here. So less than, greater than, ampersand itself can be an entity, double quotation mark, single quotation mark, all different entities, and these other symbols: cent, pound, yen, euro, copyright, registered trademark. So all of these are HTML entities. There are yet other forms as well. Base 64. Okay, so base 64 is an encoding scheme. Not decode, actually. Let's go to encode first. So if I want to encode something, let's say hello. So this is my normal text, and I want to encode it in the base 64 format. So this is the resultant base 64 code. Again, we encoded this, so this is our resulting base 64 code. And in if any kind of base 64 encoding is very likely to have an equal to, either double equal to or a single equal to at the end, but that's not necessary. Okay, if you see some text that has this double equal to sign at the end, you can be 99.9% sure that this is base 64 encoded. But not all base 64 encoded text has a double equal to at the end. And let me demonstrate that as well. So the way the base 64 encoding scheme works is it takes sets of 3 characters and converts them into sets of 4 characters. The way the scheme works. So if your input is a, you know, if the length of your input is a multiple of 3, then your base 64 text will be without any equal to signs. So if I write hello and encode it, this will have an equal to, because there are 5 characters. But if I write hello space and then encode it, this will not have an equal to sign because this is a complete 6 characters. Six and 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Again, this also won't have any equal to's at the end. This will. So this is also encoding. Any questions from this?
No, sir. No, sir.
Okay. So who can tell me the difference between encoding and encryption?
Sir, in encoding, we convert data into some desired format which we want to use, or and then in encryption we actually convert the data, but it's actually a layer. Conceptually, it's a layer. So to decrypting that layer, we get the actual data. But in encoding, the device is decoding only.
Okay.
So
And what about the process? Any differences in the process? Any major difference there?
process is like encryption uses some set of algorithm or functions.
Encoding
Um,
also uses functions, algorithms for this.
but in encryption, basically, the ciphertext is not readable.
Ciphertext
Uh,
is not.
because
But is
what we
this
convert
encoding
is not
readable?
is encoding is like converting into two readable format. It's like jumping from one format to another format using some functions.
Okay, see, I've converted this text. Okay, hello world. This is an example of a sentence. Just whatever random value you want to take. Now this is your encoded text. I wouldn't exactly say that this is readable, because readable means you need to be able to understand what is written. Now I can't really make out what this is. Okay, this is just, if I don't know the context. Okay, now I know this is base 64 and I've encoded it, but without context, if you look at it, this just sounds like garbage. So even encoding can convert into a different form which might not be readable. I'm talking about differences in the process. You want to try any once more? No. Think about what process is followed while encryption. Algorithms are used in both places. So
Keys are
algorithm,
keys are used in
yes,
encryption.
yes, that is what I was looking for. Encryption uses keys. Encoding does not. No matter how many times I encode this same sentence in base 64, I will always get this result. Always. If I'm using the same text, I'll always get this result. But that is not the case if I encrypt it. If I'm encrypting this text, I'll not always get the same result because my key will vary. If I'm using a different key every time, then for the same plain text, I'll be getting different ciphertext. And this key, that's what's critical to the whole encryption operation. That is what provides so much security to the whole, you know, encryption process. That's why you are supposed to keep your keys very safe. Otherwise, see, without a key, encryption and encoding would basically be the same thing. But the presence of a key without which you cannot decrypt ciphertext, that's what makes encrypted data secure. Okay, so this is one major difference that you should always keep in mind when you talk about encryption versus encoding. Okay, so definitely remember this and keep this distinction in mind whenever you're talking about it. And of course, the purpose of both of these things is different. With encryption, you're trying to secure your data. With encoding, the purpose is not to secure it, but to convert it to a different format, which might be readable by a different system or a different service or a different process than what you are currently using.
So when we talk about this encoding,
Hmm.
how it is useful for information security, like in CIA trade, encryption is used in confidentiality and integrity both. Then,
Hmm.
but will this encoder will play a role?
Encoding, no, not as much, but this is something else we need to be aware of. Because if I don't talk about encoding and if you don't pay attention to this, there might be some confusion there. It's not as useful in security, but base 64 encoding is used in some places to store cookies. So when the browser stores cookies, then base 64 is used in some places there. And even HTTP basic authorization uses base 64. So it's important that we know about what encoding is, what base 64 is.
See, encoding can be, I think, used in forensic means application of encoding. I think is used in forensic sciences, digital forensics.
Forensics, mainly hashing is used. If you're talking about cryptography, hashing is what is mainly used in forensics. Encoding, okay, in what sense, like, are you mentioning encoding here?
Like we are, mm, we have some called signals and systems.
Hmm.
So decoding signals, like in World War II, there are signals which has to be decoded in order to get the actual information before getting actual information.
Hmm.
So that may I thought that encoding is essential.
See, encoding is essential. I'm not denying that encoding is not essential. But the World War II situation that you're talking, that was using encryption, that famous Enigma machine that used encryption, not
But to
encoding.
intercept, but first have to intercept the wireless signals, because for intercepting wireless signals, we must know the encoding. Then the signal is cached, and then decryption is done.
Okay, yeah, in that sense, right. For wireless signals, you require encoding, but that does not take as much, nearly as much effort or time as breaking the decryption takes. So yeah, you are right in that sense, but that is not. the major, I would say, part of the process. It is an important part, but that's not where you spend most of your time. Okay, so it's encoding is used there definitely. And okay, how are encoding and encryption similar in one aspect and hashing is different? So the main difference in hashing versus encryption and encoding, not between all three, just hashing on one side and encryption and encoding on the other side. What is the main difference in
The
this case?
hashing is something to do with the integrity check of metadatas, not with the actual data. While in encryption and encoding, the actual data is converted.
No, hashing is used on actual data as well. When you see hash values on a website which provides you with downloads, like we saw on the Kali website, there's a hashes mentioned next to the downloads. So that is the content of the file, not the metadata. See, hashing. Okay, let's talk about encryption and encoding first. Encryption and encoding can both give you the original data back. If I have some encoded data, encoding is not even used for securing. It's a different format. So you can decode it, reach the original format, the original data, right? For Similarly for encryption, you convert plain text into ciphertext. You can decrypt the ciphertext to get your plain text back. But in hashing, you can calculate the hash of a file or a directory or a string of characters, but you cannot get the original value. You cannot find out the original value from that hash. There is no reverse process. There is no reversal going on in hashing.
Sir, in password stores in databases, so
Hmm.
it is stored in hashes. So
Yes.
can't we get the original password from cracking that hash?
Cracking that hash would mean like you have to use a rainbow table, or what you do is you take a word list. If you're doing a dictionary attack, you take a word list, generate the hash of every word in that word list and compare it with that hash. Then you can crack the hash as well.
A tool is need to suffice that. Means it is not directly converted.
Directly, of course, it's not directly converted. You need tools for that. Like we have John the Ripper in Linux, which does that. We saw that during the system hacking chapter, that John the Ripper tool. There's also another one, Hashcat, which can be used for this, cracking
Hydra,
hashes.
Hydra.
Hydra, Hydra is generally not used for this purpose. It's used for brute forcing passwords on services. Hydra is not used for hash cracking.
So basically, hashing is just a one-way process, and encoding and decryption is two-way process.
Yes. So these are all important concepts and differences that you must be aware of, and you should always keep that in mind. Okay, so is there anything that you would like to ask? Any questions? Anything?
No, sir.
No? Okay. uh, okay, then that's the end for this session, and we will continue in tomorrow's class.